Hey guys, this is Pilleater, and I'm joined today with Auxunauxia.
No, just go Oxy. That's fine. You can't
Oxy.
pronounce it.
How are you doing, Oxy?
I'm sleepy. I just had coffee. I'm waiting for it to kick in.
Should be kicking in now because we're gonna be talking about the Asian male question.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like really weird how in this country, like a lot of Asian people seem very they don't realize that there's media from other countries out there.
Uh-huh.
And if you want the good role models for people from your own ethnicity, try like looking at the media from like your section, like people from your section of the planet, and you find the decent role models. It's really easy, but nobody really thinks of it.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're Asian and you're living in America. I mean, there's this
Uh-huh.
whole talk about that everyone has to fill this white standard. And it turns
Mhm.
out if you're black, you fulfill the white standard. You're an Oreo, or you'll probably be like Drake or something like that. And then if you're Asian, it's okay for it's kind of progressive for the Asian girl to do the white standard, but for the Asian male, he has kind of this tough time because there's this talk that he looks like,
So
you
you're
know,
saying that like Asian males get more of like the banana like stereotype thing going on there, or stigma, versus like the Asian female. Is is that what is that a
yeah, and
my
the Asian female
understanding?
basically wins, and she's basically the most beautiful creature everybody wants to be with, the Asian girl. So it's like if you're an Asian girl in America, it's like everybody wants you, or at least white men want you. You know.
But here's the interesting counter dynamic, and you wouldn't know this because of the place that you live in. And but if you go to Asian countries, like, and you watch Asian, like, dramas and stuff like that, a lot of times in those dramas, the Asian males that come from predominantly white countries like America, Australia, like Europe, those guys that go back to the home country get so much more cred. Like,
Oh
they are
yeah.
seen as like cream of the crop, basically. And like, it's so like, it's strange and it's interesting that the Asian males in this country and like European countries do not really watch J-pop, like, I mean, like J dramas or like K dramas, like, or like C dramas, was like basically dramas from like Korea, China, Japan, etc. They don't watch that. Like, as far as I know.
They're into playing StarCraft or making really video games, or maybe just
Right.
yeah.
And in fact, like, if they watch any dramas at all, it's predominantly Western based, sitcoms and just movies and stuff like that that have, will usually have like Asian males in the very, very, like, I wouldn't say bad necessarily, but just in the role that like is based off of like white stereotypes of Asians. So, and the very simple solution to that is just to not consume Western media. Instead, watch anime, watch like Korean dramas, and watch things from the other side of the planet that has subtitles on them. And this,
Yeah.
it just seems like such an obvious solution to the problem, but not many people seem to be taking that as the, like, obvious solution that I feel like it ought to be.
You know, have you ever seen the show Fresh Off the Boat?
Yes, I've seen that, and it's really like one of the better dramas out there about this issue, I think. It's like kind of controversial, especially the title of the show. But it's like kind of clickbait for that reason, and probably the same reason why like you come up with like the Asian Aryan thing. Basically, it's clickbait. But, I
Well,
mean,
there's Asian guys in that, and they're trying to make an Asian
uh-huh,
American thing. I mean, the problem is that the liberal establishment in America sees that the Asian American mold is more should emulate maybe Black Lives Matter, and that they should have like, well, we can have our own self determination, but we hate white people, but seem to
mhm.
like white
Hey,
culture, and it's this really
would you
retarded
mind
thing.
talking? Yeah, would you mind talking to a friend of mine? She's on the line. Like, actually, wait, I should probably ask her before
Who's
I
that?
ask. Like, well, she's a Pakistani friend of mine who, like, Pakistanis are also kind of Asian, and Indian people are also Asian, but they have like a much different, like, I feel.
Well,
Actually, no,
did you
both of
want
them
her to
like
get on the
similar.
line, or should does she have a name to go by,
Actually, I should probably leave her out of it just for
or?
privacy's sake. But
Okay, okay.
I'll just like basically, say that she's like one of my best friends, and
Hmm.
the whole like Asian people in America kind of deal that like we all kind of experience is like a common factor. So it's a very interesting conversations often.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly talking about, like Northeast Asians and of, the silly, even Southeast Asians, that, more of that
Yeah.
background,
Hmm.
and especially in that dynamic, it seems, why I bring up Asian Arianism, it seems that if I know your background is in psychology, and if you've ever read the bell
Yeah.
curve, the bell curve
Uh-huh.
states that the high IQ people reign supreme, or the cognitive elite, and they kind
Right.
of basically make everyone who's low IQ suffer from that. And the economy, the socioeconomics is set through the cognitive elite. Now, it's interesting to note that Charles Murray, the co-author of that book, he says that his children, are half Asian. They're half Thai from a previous marriage, and this is pretty much an unapologetic look about having whites and Asians mixed to have a really huge IQ, right below Ashkenazi Jews. And I think a lot of people in the Silicon Valley are just a bunch of nerdy white guys into STEM and have their homely looking Asian wives, and they're having their own little Eurasian offspring off in California, not telling anyone about it.
Right. And like it's one of those unspoken phenomenon I feel in the United States. I mean, there's only so long that you can label a group as like a quote unquote model minority because before somebody asks the question, what's wrong and why is there no assimilation?
Huh. I mean, it seems like the only assimilation is between whites and Asians, and we don't live in a multicultural society. We live in a biracial society of, I like to call Asian Aryans, between a white and Asian bond. It seems like black people are there in the underclass. Same with Mexicans. Same with the other dark skins. It's Indians could, are the technical. There's some resource within the Middle Eastern people, but I find that the white and Asian thing is becoming such an easy excuse for white liberals to say they're multicultural, when really it's their best model minority they can find to appreciate white culture. Because really, multiculturalism means to the white liberal is materialism around the world, or some kind of huge globalism.
Right. Like what's your take on like the globalism thing in terms of like the Asian Aryanism? Because I mean, if you look on the globalism, like if you look at global scale of like the issue of like race and like racial dynamics, you know, internationally, and you look at something like the G8 or like the G12 or whatever, like United Nations, which countries are the predominantly powerhouses? I mean, outside of like the Middle Eastern countries because of the oil, it's mostly Western European countries, United States, like, and then Asian countries. And it's, I mean, I don't know if that's like necessarily true. I haven't done that much research on it, but like, I
Yeah,
postulate that if I
I,
mean,
it's like when we say globalism, we're thinking about one world people ruling the world. Like, it's often said on the Alex Jones show that there's some Illuminati ruling the world, where that be Jews or lizard
mhm.
people, or people like to say, whites rule the world. I mean, it's
Okay.
and now when we're talking about Asian Aryans ruling the world, that might be a little far fetched, but in some science fiction scenario, that could as might as well happen with a new version
Mm-hmm.
of globalism. But I
Right.
think
So,
it's
like, say, like in the like Alex Jones' nightmare scenario and the globalists win, who do you think would be the ones running the multinational companies that like basically like corporatist hegemony across the planet? Like, it's kind of
Probably
scary.
there's an internet meme. I always mention it, and it's a pyramid meme. And on top of the pyramid, it says "autistic Jew Asian elite." And
Oh no.
I know
Oh no.
Ashkenazi Jews of Asians. I mean, that technically is Jewish Asian Arianism if you want it to be. And then the underclass is mixed black
Oh no.
Mexicans attached to a computer. Like
Oh
Brazil, you
no.
know. I have to find that picture. It's
Horrible.
classical.
That's so horrible.
Yeah, it's the Kalergi plan in effect, and I am against the Kalergi plan. This ideal that supposedly
Uh,
everyone racially mixes and you create this mishmash cafe au lait society people that pretty much comes Brazil. There's no benefit in that at all. I find it quite destructive and a liberal perverted fantasy just to make excuses to do one thing for another.
uh, well, I mean, in a sense, that would be like erasing diversity because
Yeah.
if you create one race out of all the races, then you basically eliminate all the like positive aspects of diversity. Because if you don't have different people, then you don't have diversity.
Oh yeah, something exactly like David Duke says. He calls it human diversity. I'm a true believer of diversity, but it's the
Oh
Zio
no,
media
David
and
Duke. You
Yeah, and
brought him up.
David
You
Duke says
did.
this.
You did.
And David Duke says a lot of stuff. But people use it in a politically correct term. They call it human biodiversity. That's kind of like what the bell curve argues for. You know, there's this old conservative thing like from the Rutland's Review, or it's human biodiversity. You want every race to
Yeah,
have
and
its own self-determination and racial conservative
it's not like
preservation.
the like intelligence is such a. I mean, like with you, intelligence is such a big factor in this. But like, there are reasons why, like, I mean, in biodiversity, like, not every part of like people or whatever has to have intelligence. You got other stats like, physical strength, other like, abilities and stuff like hunter gatherers and like people like that, like, and
Yeah.
if you look at the Olympics, which countries are the ones that like are really, really good at like, physical aspects, and then there's like music, and there's so many other aspects of being human other than intelligence, and
Hmm.
like in some ways I feel like we don't value that, like diversity. That aspect of diversity is undervalued in the modern world, and there should be some kind of way to like figure that out, because I mean, intelligence is one factor, but there's other factors.
Yeah, I mean, it's like how now black people dominate the Olympics in running and doing some other
Mm.
sports, and it's just true. I mean, it's kind of a cliche now. It's like now
Yeah,
everybody
if
on
you
the
go like stereotypical, like, qualities or factors or whatever, I mean, like, there's also agility, and if we go all D&D on this, like, intelligence is one stat, okay? It's one stat.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's always said like blacks. It's like that movie White Man Can't Jump. They're doing this passive aggressive pride that black people are good at
Mhm.
sports and athleticism, and white people they're good at oppressing and being weird, and they're that nerdy kid, and it's just kind of
Right.
this cliche freaky black man kind of silly stuff that you saw in the 70s. But that's interesting. I mean, for the Asian male perspective, especially if he's Americanized, it's kind of like
Mhm.
he acts like a white guy, but has the very super intelligence and high IQ. And in this kind of pre-Socratic game, we could be talking about the pickup artist and like Rouge V and the Return of the Kings and the Manosphere, and they always talk about approaching girls. And this is what guys do to approach girls and bars and stuff. So if the Asian guy wants to put his game onto these girls, more majority white girls, it's like the girl's gonna be like, "Ew, you're geeky," and it's like, well, why associate with those girls in the first place, And so there's this kind of the Asian man when he acts, the Asian American man acts, authentic. He's
Mhm.
basically has to find his own niche who are authentic to his
Mhm.
own truth. Well, I'm saying there's a pre-Socratic thing like that. Basically, people won't accept the Asian man because he's not as jockey and chadster and bro like the generic white guy, or freak like the black man.
Mhm.
But I mean, what's your observation of the Asian men you know?
Well, the Asian guys that I know are actually, this is why I postulate with the hypothesis of like, guys that are Asian that consume more Asian media are like a lot healthier psychologically because most of the Asian guys that I know, and like they're very like, mentally, they don't have all like the, stuff that like the, what you may call it, like the Gook Slave or whoever, like the people that post on your website and
Yeah,
like comment
the
like
race
those sort of
players.
things. Yeah, and like I noticed that like the Asian guys that I know don't have those problems, and they consume a lot of like Asian media. Like they'll watch like hours upon hours of like Chinese like you know TV shows and
Hmm.
like stuff, and like and I wonder if that's like the difference,
Yeah.
because I also have like one of my Asian male friends, and he even married like a French girl.
Hmm.
I mean, so it's an interesting like possibility or like concept that I would be an interesting topic for psychological research. But
It's we always talk about white male, Asian female, but there is this chance of Asian male, white female. It's just a growing thing right
right,
now. Ironically, though, you have these liberals who are pretty much, they hate white people and they say, ew, white people dating Asian women, that's a yellow fetish. That's all this terrible stuff. But then they're so
uh-huh.
enlightening when it's like, I'm a white feminist and my wife's an Asian husband. That's so great. Asian male, white female. I mean, for one thing, I do like the coupling of Asian male, white female, but for some strange, bizarre reason, it's been translated as, I guess, an anti-white guy thing. But in return, it should be this remedy or this thing to cure the Asian American or the self-depressive Asian man, as he's finding love through these white girls who want to
Mhm.
desire some Asian patriarchy or Asian interest, and that could lead to a development of further Asian Arianism. And if they have kids, those kids are going to be Eurasian. And imagine if they have a daughter, a white guy's going to approach that daughter, then it's like, what do you make of that? So, it seems like
And
if you're Eurasian too.
statistics online. Like I've seen statistics online about like the dynamic of like Asian male and white female like kids versus like white female like I mean sorry white male Asian female like and then their kids. And I don't know how much of this is true or just like bloggers like kind of giving their perspective, but from the stuff that I've read, it seems to be like the kids of like Asian males and white females have like less psychological problems than kids of like white males and Asian females. Although, like, I'm saying this is like a controversial thing because I don't know how true the data or statistics on this are. So, I mean, if anybody on like your website could do some research on that, would be interesting.
Here's I'm gonna show some statistics here. American Renaissance published an article on May the 19th, 2017. This is from Diversity Inc. And the article is titled "Interracial Marriage Becoming the Norm in U.S." And it's a report by Cheryl Estrada. On this
Okay.
report, Diversity Inc. claims from their records of 2015, released only a few weeks ago for 2017, they see that the most common interracial marriages were between a Hispanic and white spouse at
Mm-hmm.
42%. The next most common was between a white and Asian spouse at 15%, followed by whatever from 12%. Now, this is I mean, for one, we could talk about Hispanic and white and that how sometimes Hispanic could maybe the numbers are mixed up because sometimes people say they're Hispanic and really they're white. So I don't take the first thing into account. So we're looking at the number 15%. That 15% of that's happening. And so okay, here's another thing too. The Pew study released Thursday also found that Asian women are far more likely to intermarry than Asian men. In 2015, just over one-third, 36% of newlywed Asian women had a spouse of a different race or ethnicity, while 21% of newlywed Asian men had a spouse of a different race. So 15 and 12. And finally, this is one interesting thing too I want to for the report. It says, quote, white people living in urban areas are more likely to marry someone of a different race or ethnicity than those in non-urban areas. However,
well, that's because of the high rate of like this multiculturalism in urban areas.
But it says, however, Hispanics and Asians are more likely to intermarry if they live in non-urban areas. And for blacks, the intermarriage rates do not vary by place of residence. Now that's funny. So you could pick up your Asian girl in a suburban area, and in the city area, it's the white guys who are going to be like, cool, man, diversity, the city. I'm away from Squaresville and suburbia being coddled by mom and dad. I'm going to go to a very expensive college I can't afford and try to meet people over there. But it's the Asian people who live out in the suburbs that marry over there because I think they want to start a family in the suburbs. And the city's more of the urbanite, yuppie, do-whatever decadence. But from those numbers, it seems obvious that Diversity Inc. is saying that Asian is certainly most popular between whites and, Hispanic, if you don't count that. It seems like multiculturalism and diversity, the whole diversity regime, was really just a transaction for white liberals to accept the bond of Asians, really, and to have your Asian kids to be more radical, and everybody else was just put to the side. We're not talking about multiculturalism, we're talking about biculturalism.
Yeah, well, I mean, the largest influx in recent times of immigrants to the United States have been predominantly from either Asian countries or Hispanic countries.
I mean, for the Hispanic part, I find that because they look like whites and they act like whites. And
they are white. I mean, if you consider the culture and history of a lot of the Latin American countries and Mexico and, basically most of the countries that speak Spanish, like south of the border, so to speak, they originate from, intermarriages between Spanish people and, the original natives. So if you consider that, then they are, at least in part, just white.
Yeah. But for Asians, we're talking about an exotic race that isn't white. And the shoe allegory states that we prefer to be people like ourselves. So that's why there's single mono races, is people naturally gravitate towards white people gravitate to whites, Asians for Asians, blacks for blacks. They prefer that. So, but Asians come from a different exotic place of the earth. Same with whites. And when two meet together, they're both admiring two different aspects, and they're creating this new shoe allegory where whites and Asians naturally gravitate towards one another. And it's not like a cuckolded thing. It's becoming more like, I like this girl because she has a high IQ and she's not like the bratty bimbo cheerleader feminist I know.
Well, I think it's interesting that, if you view the cultures of, the old European cultures and then, modern day East Asian cultures such as, Japan and Korea, I feel like a lot of the traditions of, Western culture that have been lost through postmodernism and, modernization to some extent, are still preserved in countries like in East Asia. And so, there are similarities, if you view it, across time. Similar to things to, if you view certain cultural aspects of China, in comparison to places like Japan and Korea, Confucianism, for example. A lot of, stuff, Confucian values, I feel have been lost since communism took over China. And nowadays, scholars in China have been going to places like Korea and Japan to kind of relearn or just reassess old Confucian values.
Because
so in a similar way that Western Europeans might look at Asian cultures and go, hey, our culture at one point in time really valued that. and like we kind of wish that our culture could move towards like valuing more of that. So
Yeah, because one thing for certain, we're seeing the alt-right happen because people are becoming more anti-liberal. We're having YouTubers like Roaming Millennial, who's both Irish and Chinese, Irish American and Chinese, and that guy T, a black guy, and Blair White, a transgender who's pro-Trump. The rainbow civic nationalist parties, and it's becoming normal for people to go for natural preferences and against the cultural Marxist liberal regime of just French postmodernism. And so the alt-right is really popular in that regard, and more white people who are not connected to World War II are finding to be more open, like saying, oh yeah, I want my white Aryan girl in the wheat field, as Andy Nowicki put it. And so there's this arrogant white nationalism that you're seeing in the middle and upper classes that's really hurting the white liberal classes. And there is literally a civil war with white people. And so if that is the true case, where the shoe allegory is real and that people can prefer to be with people like themselves, and that is natural and just, supposedly, then where's there space for people who will just say, I want to be with Asian is because I find more authenticity with this culture, and it's a nice balance for two cultures to finally meet and do their own thing. It seems like you always hear these these nationalist arguments that race mixing is bad. You're just going to become a retarded mutt dog. It's like literally having a child with autism. You just stay away from it. And yet, people are doing it, and they irrationally do it. The Gen X generation has produced a group of Eurasians, and millennials are, for the first time, guys are seeing the Asian girls, and Asian girls are seeing the white guys, and same with the Asian men who are dating Eurasian women. They're all having a bond together, whether that be through video game culture or for the higher class level of just reading Amped Asian magazine or some kind of whether that be Tila Tequila. What do you make of this whole multiracial thing? Do you think there should be an ethno-state for just whites and Asians?
Well, I feel like at this point, at least for certain countries, it's already too late to go back. I mean, I don't see how it could possibly exist for a homogeneous society nowadays because of airplanes and just travel and communications and everything. I mean, unless heaven forbid nuclear apocalypse happens and all of that goes away, you're really not going to be able to form really homogeneous societies unless you just do the Amish thing and go out in the boonies and ignore technology.
Well, there's some Luddites who do that, and some strange people. But people, I think technology will rise, and we'll still have airplanes. It's just people will go crazy conservative and keep with their race. People will preserve their races. People are in constant struggles with preservation, especially whites. The whole talk of white genocide and stuff like that. And so I do not advocate white genocide or Asian genocide. In no way am I trying to destroy old races. I wish for a human biodiversity again, going right back that. I just believe in a progressive party that can basically unite Asian Americans or Eurasians or Happies or just whites or Asian, white weebs or whitewashed Asians just interested in something that's an alternative to the decadence of today. Some white kids, especially in the STEM degrees, or even guys who practice karate or into martial arts, find themselves authentically towards East Asian philosophy, to from Buddhism to Confucius, or even some of the literature like Yukio Mishima, stuff like that is more powerful than Plato, Socrates, or Shakespeare would ever be. And so there is going to be whites who will have new alliances. The same with Asians having new alliances on the white side. It's just going to clash together and make some synergy happen. And I think there needs to be a stable institution for that, and it can't be anti-white liberalism.
Right, so you're basically saying creating a space for Hapas.
Yeah, well, in some respect, and whites and Asians, and the four boroughs theories I've been saying, but yeah. I mean, how many people do you know of white guys who pretty much are now have your Asian kids or dating Asian girls? It probably must be a lot.
Actually, not that many, but like I guess a decent amount. Just I mean, like most of the Asian people that I know right now, the ones that are actually married or have kids or whatever, usually marry either Asian or white.
Yeah, it's the again the high IQ thing. Do you ever notice that like nerd conventions, like maybe at an anime convention, or even when the most geekiest middle class or lower class, these, we call them weebs or white nerds, they have this desire to basically cosplay as an anime character. And how many times have you had a nerd say, "Oh, I want a Japanese girlfriend"? I mean, you've pretty much witnessed that, right?
Yeah.
But
But that goes to prove, like, with my hypothesis of, like, because anime is really Asian media, if you consider, like, where it originates. So
exactly.
even though a lot of times the characters look like white, but anybody with half a brain cell, like, after consuming enough of, like, the media and kind of delving into the origins or whatever, understand that despite the looks of the characters in, like, the shows or whatever, the ideals and values expressed in, like, the media that they're watching are largely Asian values and cultural norms. So
Exactly.
if you consider that, then, like, um, it's it's interesting, more or less, that,
Yeah,
like,
you
if you
know,
find a lot of guys that consume a lot of anime, they'll be a lot more interested in, like, kind of understanding Asian culture and associating themselves with Asian people. Sometimes to a degree where Asians find it odd or like silly or whatever, but it's an interesting phenomenon.
you know, I had a fight with the anime right because the anime right were basically one of the admins told me, "Well, we're Nazis, but we like anime." But you can't, but according
Yeah.
to your theory, that can't work. You're just a bunch of idiots who basically jerk
Well,
off to anime girls and say, "Oh, we want a white preservation and a white ethno state and all this." No, you basically are the true definition of fetish because the anime right should have been a catalyst to then enter towards Asian Arianism. But that doesn't seem to be happening because they're trying to say, well, we're supreme, and I think that's wrong. I think doofuses like that should be called out. And you're absolutely right. Anime has basically awakened the early millennials and a lot of Gen Xers to pursue Asian because of the huge influence of anime and the high expectation that, well, if I marry Asian, she's going to be exactly like an anime girlfriend.
uh, it's
It's
funny,
true.
weird, but like interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I seal from the white man's perspective. But again, I do believe in loyalty and that there should be a self improvement that instead of just being lazy and sitting on your ass and just making prejudices about the other side, at least learn some of the language, take up some culture, go to the country. Have manners and do some masculine things like lift weights, jump rope, punch a bag, learn boxing, Brazilian, BJJ, BBJ. Blah.
Yeah,
But
a lot of like the animes that like I've watched like really emphasize like the hard work and working out, like just like improving yourself, and like these are like values that like I feel are in common between like more old conservative like Western European values.
but it's ironically it seems like when white people are denying their future, it's only Asians that could save them by being unapologetically racial. I mean, one of my friends, Jotaro, showed me that there was a bar in Japan called the White Man's Bar, and so these Japanese girls pay these money to go with these white guys. I think one of the guys was named Brandon Lee, who are basically can speak fluently Japanese and look like yaoi guys. To basically take them on.
Only in Japan. and only in Japan.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, we hear the cliche of like the Japanese girls that please their business masters, but this is reverse. This is a girls' bar where there's handsome, sexy white men who look like anime dudes or from a yaoi and treat them to the desires. And I think that's a truly beautiful Asian Aryan thing. Just have that implemented through culture and be more open about it. I think things could happen. But it just shows you stuff like that can make people woke really fast, pilled. I even say yellow pilled for that matter.
Well, there's probably a reason why, like during World War II, Japan and Germany were in alliance.
Yeah, that's true. But it's weird because one again we go back to the thing about patriarchy, and patriarchy is a healthy thing. Of course, feminists are going to say how bad and evil patriarchy is. I'm not talking in the feminist sense. I'm talking in the natural sense of patriarchy. There's a patriarchy to a troop of gorillas, right? There's a patriarchy in like as simple as horses, right? And so it takes male power to get a message across than a matriarchy of women power. And there's been studies between matriarchy versus patriarchies. Both have their ups and downs. But it's very important to have a good patriarchy. And if there's to be a good Asian Aryan patriarchy, the patriarchy has to become both from white men and Asian men shaking hands, calling them both brothers and sisters. I think so about that. But
yeah, well, if you consider the two cultures, like Western European cultures and Asian cultures are both predominantly patriarchal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and they both can have some kind of alliance if they make some synergy together on that.
But then again, so are most like Spanish-speaking countries. Those are actually, I would say, predominantly most cultures in human society are patriarchal for whatever reason.
So, like, I always think it's weird is that if you make a bicultural, biracial alliance, it's kind of like white guys are going to be like, well, Asian men, you can have our women, in return, we can have your women. And both kind of sides benefit from that. As well, it's interesting because there's also Eurasians who are kind of like Joker cards, as they can both act as white and Asian, and they can choose which side.
Already exist, Like, if you look at, like, most of Asia, like,
Singapore.
geographically speaking, no, I was thinking more along the lines of, like, Russia and, like, the Soviet countries that everybody seems to ignore.
Like, yeah, I wonder why.
And like, all the stands and, like, those, like, all those countries take up, like, pretty much a good, decent size of Asia. And everybody just kind of, like, doesn't pay attention to those countries. But those are Eurasian countries. Also, like, sometimes if you consider the idea that, like, no news is good news, there's not that much news that comes out of, like, Uzbekistan or, like, all the stands. And, I mean, if you consider that, then they're probably doing pretty well. Relatively speaking.
Interesting. I mean, I jokingly have a flag of Kazakhstan in my room. I think one of the most I do of Central Asia. I think there's some connection with Central Asian people as they have both Chinese, Korean, and some Japanese blood with them, and some of the Russian mixes in there. And they've developed certainly a very Central Asian flair. I mean, when I say Asian Aryan, I'm talking about, North Americans and Northeast Asians in America, and as well some of the Europeans. I rarely do I talk about Central Asian people who really are bound from two mixed bloods that are showing like a Eurasian utopia. And so one of the women's from the Kazakhstani women's volleyball team is Sabina Altakabekova. I can never say her last name, but Sabina, she's so beautiful. She's been saying as she's a real life anime character. And you think she's Japanese or Korean. She's not. She's Kazakhstanian. And she's got nice bangs and a long ponytail. And it seems like the genetics of a Kazakhstani has made the real life anime character. So I hope Sabina, when she's done volleyball, has 10 kids. And make sure all those kids get out there. Because I think from the looks of Sabina, I hope there is some weird anime people being formed out between China and Europe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the globe and everything, just like, I mean, it's like the multiracial countries that are actually around or whatever. Um, just like people have been moving back and forth and traveling like around. I mean, not to the extent that we're doing it now, but like in ancient times, people did travel. It's not like it didn't happen. So, and if you look at the genetics of people like across the globe, um, and what kind of like interracial mixing like has happened, it's it's interesting. Just something to note.
Yeah, I mean, oh, there's this foreign island out in the Pacific, and probably near the island of Fiji, and this is Englishman who took his like Fijian wife there, had some kids over there. Then the kids had, there was some ancestral relationship. I think it's called the Marshall family, and it's interesting because supposedly everyone on the island is related to this one captain. Um,
Ah,
Maybe if it's a people, I think it's the Marshall Island people. I'm not so sure if I can. I
so
think
what interesting genetic things happened out of that?
Well, I think it happened is I think what happened was really it just really okay, yeah, John Marshall. It really just happened where the guy just brought his beautiful wife. They had a family there and the family reproduced and they just made their own race of people who are all related to one another and have their own Marshallese language. And so I guess if you want to be like hillbilly islanders, which is not really true, it seems to be like a
Okay.
unique mix of what we're talking about this really
Yeah.
just going and starting your own business to a weird extent but
Well, that
um
would be taking genetic experimentation to like a like kind of crazy level.
now I think what I've been talking about and some friends talk about, I think when I talk about Asian Arianism, a perfect country that fits that, not only Kazakhstan but Singapore. Singapore, all the women there there is a whole language and culture based around worshiping of like white men or white culture in general, and some of the Singaporeans
Okay.
try to look white as well, or that they feel that they are both English and the Singaporean background, and they feel like they have to come to
Well,
this.
most people in Singapore look Chinese.
Yeah, they do, but they believe it's kind of like being Jewish, where you believe you're related to God. It's kind of like you want to be as well European, and so the Singaporeans want to be this, I guess, lack for a better term, Asian Aryan people. They even the men
Well,
try to look like
just
strong, buff white
import more
dudes.
white people then, I guess.
Yeah, and that's
But
what's
like,
been really been happening. It's a nice place to but only millionaires go there. So if you're really wealthy and you want to find some free women, then that's basically the state place you go.
yeah. Well, I mean, sorry to cut this conversation short, but I should go now.
Okay.
And
Well,
yeah.
it's nice talking to you like always, and I hope we can do it again. Anuxi or Uxie.
Yep. Okay. Gotta go. Bye.
Bye bye.